Social distancing is a privilege that these people cannot afford. All across India, day laborers rushed to transportation hubs, carrying whatever they could. The nationwide lockdown has put millions out of work and started a mass exodus from the cities. For these people who are leaving New Delhi for their hometowns, the fear of starving is currently greater than the fear of infection with the coronavirus.
If we had food, why would we have left? We're not enjoying this. We know that a pandemic is spreading, but we were forced to leave. We're taking precautions and keeping as much distance as we can.
The government did nothing. Otherwise, we wouldn't have left.
India's efforts to contain the coronavirus have plunged the country into chaos. After transportation was shut down, some state governments arranged buses to bring migrant workers back to their home villages. But in other states, people were left stranded and forced to walk hundreds of kilometers home. Day laborers, street vendors, and other informal workers form the backbone of the Indian economy. With police chasing them off the streets and no savings to fall back on, the lockdown puts many of them at risk. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who had ordered India's 1.3 billion people to stay home, has apologized for the hardships they are now facing.
Especially when I look at my poor brothers and sisters. I think they must be wondering what kind of prime minister I am, who has put people in such a difficult situation. I especially ask for their forgiveness.
So far, roughly 1,000 people in India have tested positive for coronavirus, but experts worry numbers could be much higher. Fears are that an outbreak in one of the world's most densely populated countries could result in a catastrophe.
Let's bring in DW correspondent Manira Chowdhury. She's in Delhi for us. Just looking at those images, all these people on the move, only 4 hours notice given for this lockdown. Does it seem that Modi and his government were unprepared for this pandemic?
Well, the government is being appreciated from certain sectors of bringing about this lockdown at an early stage, but there are critics and there is opposition which are criticizing the government. They are saying that these measures should have been taken much earlier, like in the middle of February. And yes, the fact that the lockdown was announced with just 4 hours of notice is being criticized. And the critics are seeing this 21-day lockdown as the government trying to ramp up its preparation in terms of making available the ventilators and the testing kits. So the critics are seeing this 21-day lockdown as the government buying time to ramp up its preparation.
Let's talk about those day laborers that we're seeing those images of. I mean, it seems like an impossible situation for them, right? They're trying to make it home, but of course they risk spreading the virus if they do. If they stay, there's no guarantee of a job or even of food, right?
Yes, as I said, the criticized for announcing this lockdown without giving reassurances to people that they will be looked after. Indian economy consists of a large sector of informal economy, and with thousands and thousands of migrant workers who cross borders every single year to bigger cities in search for livelihood. They suddenly found themselves out of livelihood overnight. They have been heard saying that they can't afford to die of starvation. They have a family to look after. And they're going back to their villages and their towns in really unsanitary and overcrowded conditions. So yes, A, their livelihood has been affected, but B, there is also a danger of what diseases or viruses that they may be carrying back to their towns and villages and carrying back to their families. And in rural areas in India, the healthcare system is not that good. The number of hospitals are low, the number of doctors are less. So it looks like this is the kind of community transmission that we all have been worried about, and it may actually lead to a bigger outbreak if this exodus like this continues.
What are the chances of that? What have public health officials been saying about the current situation there with so many people potentially moving into the countryside, something similar that we saw happening in China earlier in this outbreak?
Well, it's important to also remember that the population density in India is thrice as high as that of China. So the danger is far bigger here because as we saw the images, there are thousands of workers who are walking and queuing up in bus stations to go back to their homes, to go back to their villages. And as I said, the rural healthcare infrastructure is not that well developed. And finally, there is a COVID-19 task force which has started admitting that India is going into the stage 3 of community transmission. But as I said, when it comes to pure numbers in terms of testing kits and ventilators, we are still falling behind on that number.
Okay. Manira Chowdhury reporting for us from Delhi on the situation there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, a look now at some other coronavirus developments around the world. The U.S. government's top infectious disease expert is warning the COVID-19 outbreak could kill up to 200,000 Americans. That's according to Dr. Anthony Fauci. He also said that millions could become infected. The South Korean government will provide emergency cash payments to 70% of households to help cope with the economic impact. After a spike of infections in Japan, the Asahi newspaper reports authorities will start banning foreign travelers from the U.S., China, South Korea, and most of Europe. And the price of oil now down to $23 per barrel. That's the lowest price since 2002. It's due to plummeting demand due to the global economic slowdown. Well, around the world, the mantra is now social distancing. But in Greece's overcrowded refugee camps like Moria on the island of Lesbos, that's not so easy. They were already facing dire sanitary conditions even before the coronavirus outbreak began. Many migrants stuck there also have pre-existing health problems. Aid organizations are now calling for the most vulnerable residents to be evacuated in order to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe.
In the Moria refugee camp, very few have been able to get a mask to protect against coronavirus. There are more than 20,000 people living here in dire conditions. Lack of food, washing areas, and medicine are the norm.
There is a lot of disease here. People are sick. They have fevers and skin conditions like scabies and lice. They cough and have breathing problems like asthma.
Officially, there are no COVID-19 cases here, but also no government plan to prevent them, says Doctors Without Borders. Such a scenario would be a disaster for everyone on Lesbos, refugees and residents alike.
We're talking about the children, we're talking about pregnant women, and today we're talking about the population of elderly that in case we will ever have the first positive case of COVID, they will be the one paying the price.
Before the pandemic, Germany had agreed to accept unaccompanied minors. That's off the table now, in effort to avoid bringing in outsiders from at-risk groups. Opposition parties have criticized a lack of political will to end the humanitarian crisis.
Many politicians say we don't want a repeat of 2015, but we're not talking about millions of people here, just a few tens of thousands. If you're really serious and want to do everything possible to prevent a further outbreak, then we have to evacuate these camps.
A camp intended for 3,000 people, housing 20,000. That makes social distancing here close to impossible.
Let's bring in Nicholas Panagatopoulos. He's with the International Rescue Committee. That's a humanitarian aid organization working in Lesbos. First of all, we saw those dire conditions in Moria. Now there's a pandemic to worry about. You're on the ground there. Tell us about the current situation.
Hello. As you already mentioned, the situation is very, very critical. All aid actors are concerned for both the health and the safety of the people living in the Moria Reception and Education Center and around it, as well as the health and the safety of the host population, the locals.
Is there any sort of plan in place there in case there is an outbreak of COVID-19 in the camp?
There has been some development towards a plan designed by the Greek CDC called OV in collaboration with 8 NGOs and the prefecture of Northeast Aegean, mainly to install and construct 3 different areas. One area for quarantine, one area for isolation of suspect cases, and another one for triage, so that referrals to the local hospital will be minimized in an effort not to congest it.
We've seen during this pandemic already the importance of things like face masks, gloves, ventilators. How much of that sort of important and life-saving equipment is there in the camp?
I don't think we can be talking about ventilators in the camp. Basically, primary healthcare is offered in the camp. And for the reason that there are also no protective material to cover the needs of 20,000 people that live in deplorable conditions in respect with sanitation, hygiene, overall protection and safety, access to medical care. We understand that the most important thing right now is from the Greek government to decongest the islands as soon as possible, prioritizing people with chronic diseases, pregnant women, women with newborns, people with special needs, as well as the elderly.
You mentioned the Greek government in terms of getting these vulnerable people out of the camp. What about other countries in Europe? Is there international support there?
There should be international support in respect with the unaccompanied children, because there was a number of 7 member states that pledged to receive over 1,500 unaccompanied children, and still there has been no progress. With this thing in mind and this situation, there are definitely complexities to go around, but the EU has the means and has the capacity to address this. It should be given its utmost priority.
A worrying situation there. Nicholas Panagotopoulos with the International Rescue Committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jagwamyang Bosal has been cooking free meals for those less fortunate since 1992, becoming the Charity Kitchen's manager 3 years ago. These days, rather than offering soup and side dishes inside, Buddha's temple serves large rice balls for takeout to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. Despite the change in menu, they say diners are grateful.
They give us thanks for providing them these rice balls. It's not only a rice ball to them. Everyone says thank you. I tell them that they can't get the rice balls without cooperating, waiting in line for a short time, wearing masks and sterilizing a bit before they can pick up their food. And they have to avoid eating in the same place.
Donations for supplies have declined, and volunteers, unpaid, are scarce in the best of times, and more so now because of the coronavirus. Still, some overcome the worries about catching the virus to dedicate themselves to a cause.
Before I came to volunteer here, I was told that this kitchen served the elderly, so some friends told me not to join. But I came anyway, and I think it's worthwhile, and it's okay because of our special cleaning practices.
Many of the temple's diners are especially vulnerable. Most are not registered as citizens and therefore ineligible for state aid. The large rice balls here are often their only meal of the day. There had been a decline in the number of new coronavirus cases in South Korea in early March, but new clusters emerged, including here in the capital Seoul, prompting officials to call for greater vigilance. Efforts to increase participation in containing the virus have spread across Seoul's 25 districts to Nowon, where an estimated 500 volunteers answered the call to produce reusable cotton masks.
My neighbour told me that she was volunteering to make the masks and suggested we do it together. I also want to use my sewing skill to help others. These days, everybody stays at home, so I thought it would be better to help someone instead of just staying at home doing nothing.
Although the cotton fails to offer complete protection from the coronavirus, high-quality disposable masks are rationed. Nowon's leader believes providing 2 cotton masks to each of the district's 500,000 citizens can offer other intangible benefits.
What's meaningful is that neighbors help each other when the nation, the people and the community are in great difficulty. It's not important to make 100 or 1,000 masks, but to show the power of the people in Korea to help each other when times are tough.
After completing the production process, the masks are delivered. Recipients then often donate their own higher quality medical masks to those more vulnerable. pregnant women, the elderly, and the disabled.
Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban will seek an open-ended extension to a state of emergency today in his country's fight against the coronavirus pandemic. Hungary has just begun a 2-week lockdown, and extending the law would give the government the power to pass any decrees it says are necessary to manage the outbreak. But opposition parties and EU institutions fear the move could effectively give Orban a blank check to clamp down on civil rights and democracy. Well, joining me now outside the Hungarian parliament in Budapest is DW correspondent Fanny Fashar. Fanny, we've seen several world leaders introducing these sorts of emergency powers, but this has critics worried, as some referring to this even as a power grab.
Exactly, Carl. That's because there's no clear cutoff date when it comes to this law. Once it's being passed here behind me in the parliament, most likely today, it will be basically in effect for an indefinite time. And this is exactly what gets opposition parties here in Hungary, but also voices from within the European institutions, lawmakers, human rights organizations worried that the law may be misused. Now, there's one element that's part of this emergency package that also makes especially journalists here in Hungary worried, which has to do with the fact that it says if you disseminate, if you spread false information, you can be liable and go to prison for up to 5 years. Now, this is especially of concern of journalists here because they say already the media landscape is structured as such that it is in the hands of people who are loyal to the Hungarian government. So yes, there is concern that this law will be misused, even though, of course, at this point, nobody knows how the measures, once in place, how these measures will sort of be disproportionate to the actual threat, the threat of COVID-19.
What about the Hungarian people themselves? What do they think about these potential measures?
Well, actually, if you talk to people here on the streets, as I've done during the previous days, you will hear rather concerns about the healthcare system, that they're worried that the healthcare system cannot stand its ground to actually cope with this threat, COVID-19. The majority of people here say that so far they are fine with the measures in place. They feel that this is very important, that there's a partial lockdown here in Hungary. People can still leave their homes, but only to do very, very necessary things. They are so far satisfied, but we're skeptical, where frustration is rather increasing when it comes to the actual capability, but also the state capability to help people in need because of a healthcare system who's been chronically underfunded, not only during the current government, but also during previous governments in Hungary.
All right, well, that vote's expected in Parliament later today. Fanny Fashar on the case for us in Budapest. Thank you very much. Here's a look now at some other stories making news at this hour. The Spanish Coast Guard has rescued over 70 migrants at sea near the Canary Islands. The migrants were brought to port in Gran Canaria and Tenerife, where they underwent medical checks. Since the outbreak of the coronavirus, the influx of migrants into Europe has somewhat slowed. A medical evacuation flight bound for Japan burst into flames upon takeoff from the Philippine capital Manila, killing all 8 people on board. Manila's International Airport Authority said the victims were a Filipino-American woman, a Canadian man, and 6 Filipino crew members and medics. Well, for many people trying to keep fit during the coronavirus outbreak, they know it isn't easy. Some are using online gym classes to exercise at home. But what if you had your own personal trainer right there in your own neighborhood? Well, some people in Hamburg are in luck. Pato Cervantes is a Mexican fitness coach. He lives there, and he's been leading free workouts for his neighbors. You can see them there on their balconies taking part. It all comes with music and even improvised weights, as you can see. The best part of the whole thing, no gym membership required.
A moment in the limelight for this officer from the Medellin police force. Abandon your fears, life is beautiful, he sings. A message of hope for those stuck inside. And residents watching from the balconies are loving it.
Esta es su policía metropolitana. Es un mensaje de su policía de prevención y educación ciudadana. Chao.
We're doing this in all parts of Medellin. We're trying to bring hope to the people in this difficult situation.
Serenading residents in lockdown is just one of the unusual ways authorities in Medellin are trying to get their coronavirus message across. A hearse is on its way through the streets of the city, but this is not a funeral. On the coffin, the coronavirus, and the message, although we all have to die, let's not get ourselves killed. High up in the air above the city, drones are sent flying. What are you doing in the park? You should be at home, they repeat. Here's hoping that the people of Medellin will get the message.